All right, welcome back to the channel, everybody. Today we're going to be doing just a little quick chatting video regarding the Digimon TCG ban list. Now, for those of you who are not already familiar, yesterday Bandai released a statement that in the Japanese format there's going to be 3 cards that are going to be limited to 1 copy, and in the English format we are getting those same 3 cards limited, but we're also getting a 4th card that was already limited in Japan, also limited to 1 come November 11th. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the 4 cards that are getting limited, and we're also going to be spending some time talking about my thoughts not only on the ban list in the Digimon TCG, but also how it kind of relates to some things that I mentioned in one of my earliest videos on the channel, talking about the things that I love about the Digimon TCG, but also some of my concerns, because I do think some of those may have been amplified a little bit, not only with this new ban list, but also with some of these new set spoilers coming out. But let's go ahead and get right into it. So we're going to begin by talking about the 4 cards that got limited. So in the Japanese format, there was one particular card that got limited that has had a very big impact on the meta here in the English version of the trading card game, and that is Greymon. So Alphamon is a deck that's been around a couple of sets now, but it really took off in BT9. So in BT9, we got massive waves of support, and the biggest one for Alphamon was the new level 7 Alphamon Oryuken, which kind of elevated the deck to a level that was very dominant. It was a very powerful deck. It kind of ran the format for a little bit. So basically what happened over in the Japanese TCG, even several sets down the line apparently, the Alphamon deck was still being very dominant, so eventually they limited the card Greymon to a single copy. Greymon was the facilitator for a lot of the OTK abilities, just because giving your top Alphamon security attack +1, while also being able to tuck a second Greymon underneath, giving another security attack +1, it made the deck very aggressive, so they limited it to a single copy, which ultimately wound up seeming to kill the deck. It really doesn't see a whole lot of use in the meta anymore over in Japan. As a result of that limit, though, even though Greymon was still at 4 copies here in the TCG, ultimately what this wound up creating was a bit of a scare where people just kind of dropped Alphamon entirely. You really don't, or haven't, I guess, seen it at a lot of recent events, despite the deck still being at full power over here in the English format. Obviously, the big reason for that being that if you think your deck is going to get hit, why would you keep practicing and getting good with it, understanding that it was probably on borrowed time? Now, I personally thought this was almost kind of a silly wave effect here, where if Alphamon wasn't seeing play and wasn't topping, why would they bother hitting it? Because if it's not doing super well, because people decided to just drop it, it seemed like the opposite of a self-fulfilling prophecy, where why are you going to ban something if the deck is not dominant? Because people just aren't playing it because they're scared that it's going to get hit. It was this really weird situation, but we have officially seen that news now come to the English format. We are going to have Greymon limited to 1 copy as of November 11th. Now we're going to start talking about the other 3 cards that are being limited for the first time, not only here in the States, but in the Japanese format as well. To begin with, the one that actually caught me the most by surprise is a purple option card called Calling from Darkness. Yeah, something along those lines. So Calling from Darkness basically is a 1 memory option card that says to delete one of your Digimon and then return 2 purple Digimon from your graveyard or discard pile, deleted zone, to your hand. The problem with this card, well, one of the problems with this card, is that the way the effect is worded, you don't have to delete a Digimon in order to actually get the 2 cards back. So if you have a completely empty board, you can pay 1 memory, play the option card, skip the delete your own Digimon effect, and then just pick 2 Digimon back up to your hand for free. This is a very powerful play, especially in decks, things like Beelstarmon, anything running DeathXmon, massive mega level and up Digimon that you can drop for extremely low play costs. So the opportunity cost is basically non-existent. You're paying 1 memory and getting these massive threats back. But even outside of decks like that, you're still going +1 in card advantage for only a single memory. It was a tremendously powerful card. Now, me personally, I didn't necessarily expect this ban. I would have never guessed that Calling from Darkness would get hit. A lot of people were not surprised by this, but I personally was at least a little caught off guard. I was not expecting this card. Certainly no one was really whispering about needing this card to get limited or banned. but now Calling from Darkness is limited to 1. If it was up to me, I think I personally would have at least errated the card first, so you had to delete one of your Digimon before you get 2 things back, and maybe see if that was enough to kind of power the card down. But even still, 1 memory for getting 2 bodies back is still extremely powerful, and let's face it, deleting your own stuff is what Purple wants to be doing anyways. So maybe not necessarily the worst hit there, but that is going to be a very, very big impact on practically all of the really big Purple decks. Security Control, Ophanimon, Beelzemon, all of those big names are definitely going to miss having 4 copies of Calling from Darkness, but you can still have your 1 copy. The next 2 cards are really a big hit, specifically to Crossheart, which is the brand new deck that actually only released a week ago in the TCG. Now, the big reason I think that this is happening is kind of twofold. First of all, the deck is dominant. Not only is it dominant, but overseas, it is dominant to the point that even now, when we're moving into BT12, the deck is still producing extremely high win rates, which is not healthy. This is BT10, so we're talking 3 more sets down the road, including EX3. 3 more sets down the road, and the deck is still absolutely dominating the meta. So it definitely needed to get a hit. So basically what ended up happening were 2 cards in particular were hit. The first one is a card called Sunrise Buster, which is not from BT10. It's been around since BT9, and people have been calling for that card to get hit for a while now. Sunrise Buster is an extremely powerful option card. It is 5 to play, but does require you to have both a yellow and a red source. It is both colors. You are able to play any tamer, I believe, or maybe it's just red or yellow from your hand, and then for each red or yellow tamer, one of your opponent's Digimon gets minus 3,000 DP. So it is basically not only a board progression where you can play a tamer out from your hand, but it also has incredibly high potential, especially in decks with lots of red and yellow tamers, where you can delete potentially anything that their deck can possibly produce through DP reduction, which is already very difficult to get around. So it was very, very powerful, not only as a removal option for only 5 memory, but also a card that would progress your board state by giving you a tamer on top of that removal effect. So people have been wanting this card limited for a while, and thankfully it is now going to be limited to a single copy. Crossheart played a lot of it because they do play 4 copies of both their 3-drop red tamer, Taiki, and their 3-drop yellow tamer. So thankfully, we can finally say goodbye to that card, at least a little bit, just being limited to a single copy. Now, the last card that got limited is one that I know people are not even the slightest bit confused about. That is Shoutmon times, or Cross 4. Shoutmon Cross 4 is really the facilitator for the Crossheart deck. If you're not familiar, basically the whole idea behind Crossheart is you churn through your deck with lots of search effects, so you can get 4 particular cards. Now, these cards, unique individual Digimon, can then be crossed underneath of your Shoutmon Cross 4 to make it a 1 to play. All of those inheritables will combine to make it essentially a 10,000 DP check into your opponent's security that will also have Rush. So for 1 memory, you play this 10,000 DP body and swing into your opponent's security. The reason that this is so powerful is a combination of a tamer that is able to take the materials when the Digimon is deleted, and also allow you to play materials that are underneath him whenever you are trying to cross. Combine that with the additional effect from Shoutmon Cross 4, which says at the end of your attack, as long as this wasn't deleted, you can destroy it and save your material underneath that tamer to unsuspend it. So if you have multiple copies of Cross 4 in your hand, you can play them for 1, swing, delete it on its own, save your materials, unsuspend. Suspend it, play another one for 1 memory, swing again, and just keep doing this until your opponent ultimately loses the game. Now combine this with the absurdity that Cross 4 also lets you draw 2 cards when you play it, and ultimately the deck is not only extremely hyper consistent, but it is also absurdly aggressive, able to one-shot your opponent potentially as soon as turns 2 and 3. The deck was absolutely wild when it had a good open. So seeing this card limited to 1 is completely expected, to be honest, and I don't think anyone's really upset about that. Now that we've gone over the 4 cards, we're going to talk a little bit more about the logistics of the ban list, and I want to kind of give some of my own takes. Now, everything from this point forward are going to be my personal opinion, so I want to make sure I get that out there right off the bat. You don't have to agree with me. These are just thoughts that I had that I wanted to kind of verbalize in a video context, just let you guys know kind of where my thoughts are at here. To begin with, I think this ban list is somehow too late, too early, and too conservative. It's weird. So this is a very abnormal ban list for me. Now, for those of you who don't already know, the ban list for the Digimon TCG has already been a little bit of a hot topic. The way that it's been handled up to this point has been confusing, to say the least. The first couple of ban list announcements were very odd. I think it was the second, or maybe it was the third official ban list announcement, had, I want to say, like 6 or 7 cards on it, but they were spread out over 3 different ban dates. So basically the announcement said, okay, these cards are going to be limited to 1 or banned from this date, then these cards are going to be banned or limited from this date, and these cards are also banned or limited from this date. It was bizarre. It was confusing. It didn't make a lot of sense. And while I'm sure plenty of people were very on top of things and understood how that was going to end up functioning, this actually was around the time that I was first starting to actually find local stores that were doing events, so I was finally getting to go and actually compete. So around that time, I was just trying to get into the competitive scene. Well, competitive scene. I was just trying to have fun. But you understand, this was my first time trying to actually go to events, and I had to try to keep track of when these cards were supposed to get hit and when they weren't, so I knew what was legal and what wasn't. It was so bizarre. Like, it was so confusing having to keep track. Okay, this is now banned. Now this is banned. This doesn't get banned until then. I'm like, all of these were announced together. And I kind of understand wanting to give players the time to play with certain cards. Certain cards, such as DeathXmon and Savior Huckmon, were limited to 1 because of the advent of Chimeramon in BT8, so I kind of at least understood why they were letting those exist up until the release date. But if all of that was true, again, there were so many different ways to go about this. In theory, in my opinion at least, they could have waited until it was closer to the date they were actually going to limit the cards, and that may have at least created a little bit less confusion. Now, I understand wanting to at least give players a heads up, like, hey, these are going to get axed. You may not want to invest in this if you are, hoping to play this for the long haul, because these cards are not going to be around after this particular date. Even still, why wait and spread these different announcements out but make them all at once? That part really confused me, and honestly, the ban list is just kind of not really I'm trying to think of the best way to put this. It's been handled weirdly ever since then. Most recently, over the summer, we also had a limit to 1 for a couple of different cards, specifically Tommy, DeathXmon, and these cards were largely considered to be too late. When these cards were ultimately limited, we had already seen Yellow Hybrid and Blue Hybrid completely dominating, and I mean dominating, the meta for multiple months by this point. I mean, the sets that they came out in had already been released, and they had been running the format. Now, there were other decks that were still up there, but by far, Yellow and Blue Hybrid were still dominating the meta. And by the time that they finally were like, all right, we're going to go ahead and limit Jet Sylphie and Tommy to 1 copy, I mean, by that point, the decks were already kind of slowly starting to decline. Now, they were still powerful and probably still would have been powerful into the next set, but really the time that they were needed to be limited had already passed by that point. They had already completely shut the door on that past meta, and now we were already getting ready to enter into a new one. So it was, like I mentioned, it was just odd, some of the decisions and timing that they've been making with the ban list. Now, this new ban list is no exception. They've kind of gone the opposite extreme with this one, where they've just decimated the new hotness that just came out of a set they literally released in the States last Friday. It is literally to the day a week after the deck even entered into the TCG. So basically, we had 1 week to play with full-powered Crossheart, and technically speaking, we do have until the 11th of November, so we still have, a couple more weeks left with those cards. But they basically didn't even give the deck room to breathe. We knew it was, of course, going to be dominant, and it was already showing up in a lot of store championships. I mean, I saw it myself at some of the ones that I went to. But banning a deck that quickly after release is an interesting choice. It goes the complete opposite direction. The problem with this, because I'm not even necessarily saying that it was wrong to hit those cards. We knew they were going to be dominant. But the problem with hitting them this quickly after release is a couple of different things, and things that I'd actually already mentioned to some of the people in my play group. So think about it this way. If you've released a brand new set and people get really excited about it, they buy into these decks, and you instantly hit that deck on the next list, that doesn't create a lot of confidence that the decks you're investing in can stick around, especially if you're trying to buy into the new meta deck. Now, again, hopefully this is not going to become a trend, and they're going to at least give some decks time to breathe in the TCG. But it's a weird balancing act. Ban lists in any card game that you play are going to be a little bit controversial, where you need to kind of balance between let your cards breathe and have their time, while also making sure you are not letting your deck become unhealthy. You need to make sure that when there is a problem, you are hitting the cards causing that problem so people can have a fun experience. If a single deck is running the game and you can't compete unless you're playing that deck or a deck that counters that deck, that's not healthy, and it's going to create an unfun play environment. So the ultimate problem is, like I said, it's a double-edged sword, and you have to kind of find that balance. This, however, is, again, it's I keep saying the word odd. It is. It's an odd decision. Banning a card a week after it enters the game is an interesting choice. On one hand, it does demonstrate they're at least paying attention and are willing to hit cards that are problematic, but again, it doesn't instill confidence in investing in new products if they're going to ban them that quickly. So again, there's a couple of mixed emotions that I have on that particular aspect of the ban list. Now, the other side of that coin is, I mentioned it was too early, too late. Like I said, Sunrise Buster, Calling from Darkness, they've been around for a little while. Shoutmo Cross 4 was a little early in my opinion. The other thing, I don't think that Banlist actually did enough. If I have any reputation in the Digimon community, it is two things. It is my love of Machine Dramon from EX1, and it is my hate, absolute disdain of DeathXmon. DeathXmon, I made, again, referencing a video that I made, actually one of my very first videos on the channel, was talking about the things I liked about the Digimon TCG and the things that I was concerned about. One of my biggest concerns, there were two of them, and we're going to talk about my two biggest concerns from that video. One of them was the design space that DeathXmon exists in. What I mean by that is DeathXmon is not tied to any particular archetype. DeathXmon is a very generically powerful card that can literally be played in anything with almost zero opportunity cost. Basically, the way that DeathX is designed, you don't have to digivolve it onto anything. It is a play from hand card that will get cheaper as long as your opponent is playing the game. That is the only requirement. It gets cheaper for every tamer and every Digimon that they have in play. So as long as they are participating in the game that you're playing, it's going to be extremely cheap, a massive body, and when it comes down, it does so much that, again, there is no reason not to play it, regardless of what archetype you're playing. And I think that is extremely unhealthy. When you start digging into these design spaces where you have these staples, especially when you're talking about this card, which is a secret rare, costing, I think, $80 at the time of making this video for the cheapest version, that is not healthy. You basically need to have copies of that because your opponent is going to be packing them if you're playing competitively. It doesn't matter what they're on. They have the capacity to play it. Not only do they have the capacity to play it, but you now, regardless of if they do have that card or not, you have to play a certain way just in case they do have it, because it is a constant threat. Again, no matter what you're playing against, you know they could have a copy of DeathXmon, so you have to play a certain way, so you play around that card. When you have a card that is so generically powerful that it is always a constant threat, and it is actively controlling how people are able to really play the game, that is a big, big problem. We don't want to see more of that. That is a very serious problem. So ultimately, what I and a lot of people would like to see is that DeathXmon be straight out banned. I don't like the card. I don't like that it exists. It does too much. Y'all have probably seen me. Even in my first place deck profile that I posted, I play 2 copies of the card. There's no reason not to. As much as I hate it, if I want to do well, I know that I need to include copies because it is that powerful. When a card is that dominant, is that powerful, is that generic, it needs to be banned, in my personal... Again, these are my personal opinions. Now, a lot of people I know agree with that opinion. They don't like that DeathXmon exists, and they want to see it removed. The problem is there's a lot of factors to it being removed, right? So one of the big factors of not wanting it, for people who did not want it banned yet, was cross art, because it is a very good answer to cross art because they play so many tamers. You can play it for free and try to interrupt their plays before they can OTK you. With that being said, now that cross art's banned, there's still another deck in the format that it is easily the best counter to, and that's DeathXmon. So there's, on one hand, if you decide to ban DeathXmon, you could basically, in my opinion, again, my opinion, I feel like you can't effectively ban it now unless you are also getting hits to DeathXmon. Now, come EX3, that may change. There may be decks that do a little bit better and help kind of push DeathXmon out of the spotlight. DeathXmon is also getting very hyped right now because it's pretty easy to access, thanks to the starter deck. Granted, DeathXmon GX is a secret rare, but most of the deck is actually very affordable, so it's very, very popular right now. And DeathXmon also has a big cult following, just like some of the other decks I've talked about, like Machine Dramon, Gammamon, Dark Knightmon. It has a very big fan base, so it is very popular, and yes, it may on its own start to die back. But if you have not played against the new DeathXmon archetype yet, it is incredibly explosive and very consistent thanks to all of its new support pieces. The problem is, if you were to ban DeathXmon right now, that is currently one of your best overall answers to handling that deck. Without DeathXmon, the number of decks that actually stand a chance against DeathXmon drops drastically, from what I can tell. So basically, if you're going to hit this, you have to also hit this. That's a paradigm we've actually seen in a lot of different card games. Yu-Gi-Oh! Does that all the time, where if they hit or release a card from their ban list, they are going to do something similar with a different card because they know there's going to be a butterfly effect based on that card either entering or being removed from the card pool. So DeathXmon, in one hand, kind of finds itself in that position. With that being said, I genuinely don't know why they didn't just go ahead and do both of those hits. Hit something from DeathXmon and just get rid of DeathXmon. Now, another problem with DeathXmon, a lot of the cards that have been hit up until this point, except for one, have been a limit to one. We actually haven't seen very many actual bans. The only card that is currently banned in the Digimon TCG is Mega Digimon Fusion. Rightfully so. It's a very good card, and banning it to one doesn't necessarily fix its issues. That, unfortunately, is the exact same issue that we're going to have with DeathXmon. A lot of people are saying, well, just limit it to one. Well, if you just limit it to one, that means that every Digimon deck from here on is just going to be 49 cards, because you're going to play your 49 archetype cards, and you're going to play your single copy that you're allowed to of DeathXmon. This, again, it doesn't solve the problem. As much as I wish it did, that doesn't solve the issue. Now, you'll have decks like Security Control and other decks that can no longer play, 4 or 3 copies of DeathXmon, but you're still going to have that card everywhere, and its impact on the meta, as I mentioned, like controlling how people play the game, knowing it's a constant threat, that doesn't go away. And that's a problem. And honestly, even if they choose not to play around DeathXmon, again, the reason you have to is because if you don't play around it, it punishes you to such an extreme degree, it could end the game on the spot just by coming down. 15,000 DP for 0 memory that also wipes your opponent's board and keeps wiping their board on subsequent turns. That's so bad, guys. That's so bad. It's so much. I don't understand why this card got past RNG, but it did. It got past the development team. We now have it. If you don't ban it, it's going to keep seeing play, probably for the foreseeable future. I don't genuinely understand why, when they got rid of Crossheart, they didn't also just go ahead and take something away from DeathXmon and take out DeathXmon. I really think they needed to do that. Now, one of the big things that really, again, does concern me with the ban list, I want to talk a little bit about the other thing that I mentioned as a concern in my old video. I'm trying not to make this super doom and gloom, but these are points that I am genuinely concerned about, so I do just want to talk about them, if not briefly. So the other big thing that I mentioned in my other video, talking about the things I was concerned about, was redundancy design space. So basically, the other big talking point that I had is actually about to come out in EX3 in a couple of weeks, and that is the purple-red Imperial Dramon deck, and how, number one, how explosive the deck is, able to go from champion up into 2 level 6s, dragon mode and then fighter mode, in a single turn, thanks to a bunch of Digivolution effects, but also the redundancy where you can't actually hit the deck without killing it, because it has multiple pieces with identical effects. Now, thankfully, that identical effect bit is only super relevant when you're talking specifically about Jogress or DNA Digivolution mechanics, for the most part. So the ability to basically say, like, in the case of that particular deck, the 2 cards are Flame Dramon and Sha Dramon. Well, you can't hit one without hitting the other, because they both have identical effects where they play the other and then end of turn DNA Digivolve. So you can't really do that unless you hit both of them, and if you hit both of them, the deck doesn't exist anymore. You just Thanos snapped the entire deck out of existence. So it's a very slippery slope. Now, Purple-Red Imperial is not a super dominant deck, at least it wasn't over in the Japanese format. With that being said, for the record, D-Reaper was not super dominant over there either, and D-Reaper has run the meta a little bit. Not run it, to be fair. That's not fair to say. It didn't run the meta, but D-Reaper was absolutely a much more competitive deck in the States than it was overseas. We absolutely could wind up seeing that for Red, Purple, Imperial. But I'm not worried about that. The thing that I'm worried about is the topic of power creep and how, as we go into further sets, the explosiveness that decks are starting to receive is becoming a little bit out of hand. So we are currently in the midst of our BT12 spoiler season, and I actually haven't posted any real videos outside of Chaos German X Antibody about the new cards that are coming out, and there is a reason for that. While a lot of them I think are really cool with interesting design spaces, we finally got new black hybrids that are really cool. We've got a new blue hybrid, because that's, what blue really needed was more hybrids. But we've also had a lot of our anime big face name cards, such as Emperor Greymon as of last night, another War Greymon line, because again, we really needed more War Greymon archetype synergies. We've also had Imperial German and a couple of other big things that have come out. So looking at a lot of these spoilers, I'll be honest, I'm very concerned. It has in every way amplified the concerns that I had way back when I was talking about the Purple Red Imperial from EX3. We're seeing more redundancy, and we're seeing a lot more spamming of these explosive effects. Now, we have, in the last couple of sets, started to see what I think is going to kind of lock itself in as the power creep mechanic that the Digimon TCG is going to have to deal with as we move forward. Every game has it. Magic, you cheat on mana. Yu-Gi-Oh, you get to special summon more freely. In Digimon, the mechanic that seems to be facilitating power creep is digivolving through effects. So I want you guys to take a minute and I want you to look at how Digivolution has worked up until this point in the game, where you're paying a cost, put a Digimon out, draw a card. You have to do that mechanically, basically meaning you have to do it from your hand, put it into play as in a state-based action, draw your card. That is how Digivolution has always worked. Now, we've slowly started to see new ways to do Digivolution as the game has progressed, and they've all been relatively balanced. We've had hybrid Digivolution, being able to do it onto a Tamer instead of a Digimon. Okay, so that's a nice little, medium step up in power. That's a really powerful effect, but it's not going to break the game. Then we kind of took another step and we went up into DNA Digivolution. Well, now if you have these two Digimon in play that are the right level, meet the color requirements, well, you can combine them for free into this new entity, and that is going to, again, be a nice source of advantage. And again, you still have to do that by mechanically doing it from your hand. You have to play the card down as an action, and you have to be basically, it has to be your turn, and you have to do all these things. You have to meet the requirements in order to digivolve. Now we are starting to see a bit of a change in that trend. And what really started to get this under my attention was, again, watching the new DeathXmon deck rotate. One of the big things that the new DeathXmon deck is able to do, and the reason it is able to facilitate these massive explosive plays, is starting from its level 5, there are a chain of effects you can use to digivolve up and up and up and up and up. Now, obviously, literally speaking, you're only going to go up 2 more levels. You're going to go up into DeathXmon and then most likely into DeathXmon GX. But the problem is you can do this without passing turn. Or no, that's incorrect. You can do it while passing turn. That's the important part. So basically, if you have your level 5, you have an effect that says when you do this, go ahead and just digivolve into your next stage in the middle of your play. So that'll take you up into DeathXmon X Antibody, seems to be the most common one. There's also a new Sistermon with the same effect, where you again just get to have an effect that says, all right, you're good, just keep going and go up into your level 7 now. And basically just through these effects, you can then facilitate more Digivolutions to power your way up your ladder without actually needing it to be your turn. You don't have to worry about paying the memory cost. You can pass turn by doing this and still go up into your next level. And I'm starting to realize it's effects like that that are going to start pushing the power creep in Digimon up and over the edge. Now, we've already seen this to a lesser extent with some very specific cards. The Gatomon from the purple-yellow starter deck that had Mastemon also has an effect where his inheritable says, at the end of your turn, you can DNA Digivolve. What this means is if you have something on top of it, you can hard play the other piece from your hand, the turn passes, and then you can already just go ahead and progress into that next level. We've already seen this on the Imperial Dramon starter deck's Wormmon, and we now have this on both halves of the Ragnar Lordmon structure deck's level 5s, both Doramon and, oh goodness, what's it, Tia Ludamon? or is that the level 4? You guys know what I'm talking about. So we're starting to see these effects that let you digivolve after you've already passed your turn. This is where things are going to start getting a little out of hand. So to begin with, as I mentioned, one of the big reasons that Imperial Dramon Purple Red does scare me from EX3 is it has that effect. It has a champion that will, first of all, revive the other half for free. So you already, just by having your champion, you basically get the other copy for free. So you have two halves. Both of them do it. So regardless of which one you see, as long as the other one's in the yard, you can already get your combo. Then they both have the effect, end of turn, DNA Digivolve. When you DNA Digivolve, then you can blitz. When you do this, then you go up into the next level. So you have this chain of effects. Effect hits, DNA, or effect, DNA, effect, Digivolve. And you just keep climbing and climbing and climbing and climbing into these things that, again, just skyrockets out of control. This is the thing that is really starting to concern me. Now, the reason that I'm bringing this up now in relation to the ban list. So now that we are looking at BT12 spoilers, if you have looked at the new Imperial Dramon support, again, Imperial Dramon just seems to be the stinking love child of Bandai at this point. Imperial Dramon is getting more of these effects, where end of turn, DNA Digivolve. Now this is going to be classic classic blue and green. So this is now all of these effects are being tacked onto an already powerful archetype that was still doing things overseas, despite being several sets ahead at this point. Now it's getting all of this insane new synergies and new support that are, in my opinion, we'll see what happens when BT12 comes out, but it's a big concern in my personal opinion. Not only are they getting these effects that let them, again, stat climb super easy, but now we've also got a pair of level 4s that you're supposed to be DNA Digivolving with. Now DNA Digivolving, again, usually costs 0. Up until this point, all of them cost 0. So you're already doing it for free. So the way that these new ones work is when you DNA Digivolve with them, both halves gain you memory. So it's not free. You're going memory positive by DNA Digivolving with these things. Tack onto that the fact that you have these end of turn DNA Digivolve inheritables on rookies. And basically, you have the ability to you Digivolve into one of them, you can hard play the other. End of turn. DNA Digivolve, gain 2 memory. Now it's your turn again, keep going, and now you're at your level 5, which could easily be the structure deck Pyildramon, which gets 2 free attacks, which is probably going to have jamming, because one of the halves of this gives jamming now. So now we have a total of 8 jamming inheritables with 2 different XVmons. It just keeps stacking. The new Imperial Dramon support specifically. Now the other ones may not be quite as bad, not by a long shot, but even the new Gallantmon support has a War Growlmon that will Digivolve you up into a Gallantmon for its cost just by Digivolving into War Growlmon. Again, you just kind of get to skip the level 5 stage and go straight to level 6. This, to me, is a very big concern. So how does this all relate back to the ban list? The problem is, again, I think these ban lists need to start being handled a little bit more aggressively. We need to stop seeing just 1 or 2 cards, maybe 3 cards getting limited to 1, and we need to start seeing Bandai actively adjusting the ban list more frequently. Now, the game is not going to, I don't think, be broken in half, but if you do keep an eye on a lot of the events and the standings and metas that have been going on overseas, one of the guys in my playgroup just pointed out the other day, they have had multiple formats in a row where single decks end up creating, 50 or taking up about 50% of the meta showing. And again, that's really unhealthy. One deck should not be nearly that big. And if Bandai is not willing to start more actively hampering these decks and reining them in, like we are now seeing with Crossheart in the States. Now, again, I did think that was a little early. Give the deck at least a chance to exist first. But if they don't start doing this more aggressively, the game is going to start declining. The interest is going to start dropping because people don't want to just have to keep buying the new deck. Now, again, there are people out there who don't like that they keep giving the same deck support over and over again. And I even made a comment earlier like, oh, we got War Greymon line number like 500 coming up out of BT12. But I do like that older decks every once in a while will get like a little piece of support here and there that keeps the deck able to at least continuing to do something. I like that old decks are still able to compete because it keeps the game diverse, keeps the game interesting. You have people who like to specialize in certain decks, like me. I'm a Machine Dramon stan, and I've been playing Machine Dramon since EX1, and I will continue up until BT12. It's going to be my pet deck for the foreseeable future, and I'm really excited for EX3 next week. But it's never going to be so dominant that it's going to be taking over 50% of the meta like that. Like, a lot of these new cards and these power creep, it needs to be reined in a little bit more. There's another half of it too. If the big thing is you can't always just rely on the ban list to clean up your game for you. Bandai also needs to start really looking into the design space of some of these cards. They need to stop putting end of turn Digivolve. When you attack, Digivolve. When you do this, Digivolve. If it's a Tuesday and the moon is out, Digivolve. Like, you have to stop. Please, I'm asking earnestly, stop putting these effects that let you skip stages and go straight to the next one without having to mechanically do it. That is really what I can tell already is going to be the thing that is going to power creep Digimon to the point where old archetypes start getting shoved out of the game instantly. I'm really hoping that this is a trend that will ultimately resolve itself. I'm hoping Bandai does wake up and try to manage the game a little more actively. I hope we do see more ban list updates in the future. Now, again, I think it's a slippery slope. You don't want to update the ban list too much because you want people to have confidence that their deck isn't going to get hit. But when you're seeing these showings, especially as we've already seen overseas, you have to be more proactive with your ban list or the game is going to get stale. Blue Hybrid was allowed to be the deck for way too long. A lot of the locals I went to during BT7 format were just Blue Hybrid every single round because that was such a powerful deck. There was no reason to play other things outside of personal choice. We can't have many more formats like that or it's going to hurt the popularity of the game. So anyways, I just want to talk a little bit about this. Like I said, looking at a lot of the spoilers coming down the pipeline, as well as seeing that the way they've handled this most recent ban list, I really don't understand why they didn't just go ahead and hit DeathX with a couple of other bans to make sure that its absence didn't cause a power vacuum. But, you know, I'm not the one in charge. And again, you may disagree. You may think that DeathXmon and JessMon are fine and are okay to keep around. That's completely fine. We do have the new floodgates, so DeathXmon may not be as bad as it used to be, but again, just as something to mention, the absence of Crossheart from the meta also alters how people are going to be deck building now. Like for me, I literally just posted a first place Machine Dramon deck profile earlier in the week, and I already have to change it because the deck is specifically set up knowing that Crossheart's going to be a dominant meta threat. So now that that's not going to really be there anymore, as one example, Chikurimon may not have as much use in the meta as it did before. There's still going to be Blue Flare, there's still going to be Beelstarmon, decks that are hurt by that floodgate, and it will continue to stop DeathXmon, but it's no longer good against the best deck in the format because it's not the best deck anymore. Removing decks from the format also has butterfly effects where it's going to affect how people deck build. And I do think in certain ways, if those floodgates become less popular, it's going to make DeathXmon even scarier again. I also need to adjust my Cyborg lineup again. This one I'm just rambling about my own issues because now BT9 Mega Dramon doesn't have quite as much stock anymore because Taiki is his primary deletion target and that's not there, so I'm probably going to have to move him down to one copy. But anyways, all of this is a topic for another day. Once EX3 comes out, I'm going to end up making another Machine Dramon deck profile covering the new support and going over all the new synergies. But anyways, thank you guys so much. This ended up being a bit longer of a video than I intended already. Thank you all so much for stopping by. If you made it this late in the video, I hope you enjoyed. Feel free to like and subscribe. These just talking videos are just meant to be exactly that. They're just talking. I'm not trying to make doom and gloom. I'm not saying the game is dying. I still am absolutely in love with the Digimon card game, and I'm going to continue to be for the foreseeable future. I am still excited about a lot of the spoilers that are coming down from BT12. I'm just a little concerned that we are starting to see that power creep start to ramp up, and I think decks are going to get very, very, very crazy very fast. And again, the new JessMon is a great example of how we're already starting to head in that direction in terms of what it's capable of. Anyways, with that, again, I hope you guys have had a good time. Feel free to leave some comments down below. Let me know your thoughts about the new ban list and how wrong I am about all of my other opinions regarding power creep and how the ban list should be handled. With that, guys, I'm an avid herpetologist. I hope you guys have a great rest of your weekend and a happy Halloween on Monday, and I will see you all next time.